Tamlin's hammer struck the anvil with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Each blow rang out like a bell through the mountain village of Kestal, a sound once welcomed as the pulse of prosperity. Now it tolled like a funeral dirge. Sweat beaded on his brow, trickling down his face and mingling with tears he no longer noticed. The forge blazed hot, but nothing in this world could match the heat that had consumed his family. Dragonfire. "Tamlin!" A voice pulled him from his trance. Halwyn, the village elder, stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading twilight. His face was weathered with lines deep as crevasses, his eyes weary beneath a shock of silver hair. "You've been at it for 3 days straight." Tamlin wiped his brow with a cloth blackened with soot. "The order for pikehead replacements can wait," Halwyn finished. "We need you alive more than we need your steel." Halwyn crossed the workshop, boots crunching on bits of scale and slag. He was one of the few who didn't treat Tamlin like a madman for his obsession. Perhaps because he, too, had seen what dragon breath could do to the flesh and stone alike. "The council met today," Halwyn said, changing the subject. "Another village gone in the eastern valleys. Ashkeep." Tamlin closed his eyes. "How many survived?" "Few enough to fit in Varon's barn." Halwyn's voice dropped. "The elves had promised them protection, wards, barriers, like they promised us." "And let me guess," Tamlin said, not bothering to mask the bitterness in his voice. "Their emissary expressed profound regret before retreating to their gated forests?" Halwyn didn't answer. He didn't need to. 5 years ago, when the first corrupted dragons appeared over human lands, the Elven Concordat had pledged solidarity. They spoke of ancient pacts of shared destiny. They promised warding crystals that could repel Dragonfire, which never materialized. When pressed, they spoke of logistical concerns and arcane complications. Meanwhile, human settlements burned. "There was something else," Halwyn said, hesitation evident in his voice. "A traveler from beyond the Ghost Marsh." Tamlin raised an eyebrow. Few ventured through that treacherous stretch of land, haunted by mist wraiths and bog spirits. What did they want? "He's dying, Tamlin. Dragon venom. But he asked for you specifically." "Me? Why?" "He wouldn't say." Halwyn looked uncomfortable. "You know how rumors spread." Tamlin's jaw tightened. Since the dragon raid that took Miriam and Livy, his experiments had become notorious. Some called him brave, others a fool. Most settled on madman. Where is he now? "Mirth's healing house. He won't last till morning." Tamlin set down his hammer and reached for his cloak. "I'll see him," Tamlin said. The healing house smelled of witch hazel and death. Mirth, the village healer, led Tamlin to a back room where a man lay on a straw pallet. His skin had a grayish pallor, veined with black lines spreading from a wound on his neck. Dragon venom. There was no cure once it reached this stage. The man's eyes fluttered open as Tamlin approached. Eyes of such a pale blue they seemed almost translucent. "You're the smith, the one who lost everything to Dragonfire." Tamlin tensed. "I didn't come here to have my griefs laid bare, stranger." "Forgive me." The man tried to sit up but failed. "My name is Corvin. I was a lore keeper in Osteria before it fell." Osteria. Tamlin knew the name. It had been one of the great human cities of learning, built around an ancient library said to contain wisdom from the First Age. It had burned 3 summers ago. "What do you want from me?" Tamlin asked. Corvin beckoned him closer. "They say you seek to forge armor that can withstand Dragonfire." "People say many things." "They laugh," Corwin corrected. "They mock the very idea. Fight gods with iron, they say. May as well fight the sea with a cup." He coughed, and a trickle of black liquid seeped from the corner of his mouth. But the ancient texts speak of such things. Tamlin felt a flutter in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, or its dangerous cousin. What texts? In Osteria's deepest vaults were scrolls saved from the First Dragon War, accounts of a metal that remembers fire. Corvin's voice dropped to a whisper. Starbound steel, they called it. I've heard such fables, Tamlin said dismissively, though he hadn't. Fairy stories. Not stories, Corvin insisted, his breath becoming more labored. The scrolls spoke of an alloy forged from ore that fell from the heavens, quenched in the willing blood of a dragon. His hand shot out, gripping Tamlin's wrist with surprising strength. But it wasn't the metal alone that gave it power. It was the intent. Intent? The forger's pain, memory, resolve. Each hammer blow, a moment remembered. Each fold, a love honored. Corvin's grip was slackening. The final text said, the metal remembers the fire that shaped it, and refuses to yield to lesser flames. His eyes were losing focus. Where would I find this metal? Tamlin asked urgently. This star ore. Corvin smiled faintly. You already have it. That's why I sought you out. The black stone in your mountains. It fell from the stars long ago. Your people shaped tools from it, never knowing. Tamlin's mind raced. The black ore from the high mines? Dense, difficult to work, but unmatched for durability. They used it sparingly for specialized tools, never weapons. It was too heavy, too stubborn. And the dragon blood? Tamlin pressed. How am I to obtain that when even approaching one means death? But Corvin's eyes had closed. For a moment, Tamlin thought he had lost consciousness, but the dying man spoke one last time. So softly, Tamlin had to lean in to hear. The blood is symbolic, not literal. The scrolls spoke of tears, the willingly given. Tears of a dragon who remembers what it was before the blight. His hand fell away from Tamlin's wrist. He's gone, Mirth said quietly from behind. Tamlin stood, his mind churning with implications. A forge technique, not just a material. Memory wrought into metal through ritual and intent. It was either profound wisdom or the desperate babbling of a dying man. But in a world where dragons had once been peacekeepers before corruption twisted them, was anything truly impossible? While Tamlin contemplated impossible alloys in Castal, far to the west, in the cloistered elven capital of Siltharion, a different kind of revelation was unfolding. Larael Amanil moved through the Hall of Records with practiced stealth. Being the junior archivist had its advantages. No one questioned her presence among the scrolls and codices, even at this late hour. The soft glow of luminescent crystals embedded in the ceiling cast blue shadows across ancient texts, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny stars. Unlike most of her kind, Larael preferred the company of the dead, or at least their written words. The dead didn't judge her family's disgrace. She reached the section she sought. Pre-blight dragon accounts. These were not restricted precisely, but they were discouraged. The Conclave preferred to focus research on containing the present threat, rather than dwelling on a golden age lost to memory. Her fingers traced spines of books bound in materials that predated paper. Tree bark preserved by ancient magics. Dragon scales gifted during the bonding ceremonies. Parchment made from fungi that grew only in the presence of dragon song. She selected one volume, its cover a deep crimson that seemed to shimmer in the low light. Rather late for casual reading, isn't it, Archivist Amanil? Larael managed not to flinch at the sudden voice. She turned to find Elder Thaman regarding her with thinly veiled suspicion. His silver robes marked him as a member of the Conclave of 13, the ruling body since the Isolation Edict. "Elder," she acknowledged with a respectful inclination of her head, "I'm researching potential weaknesses in the corrupted dragon's physical structure. The pre-blight accounts might yield insights." Not entirely a lie. Theoman studied her with ancient eyes that had seen the first dragon turn. "Be cautious with memory, young one," he said at last. "The past holds dangers as great as any rampaging worm." He glanced at the book in her hands. "The song cycles, a curious choice for anatomical research." "Different perspectives yield different insights," she replied evenly. Theoman nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Remember your family's position, archivist. You walk a thin line already." With that parting barb, he glided away, silver robes whispering against the stone floor. Larael released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The reminder was unnecessary, as if she could forget that her brother Therion had been the last dragon rider to succumb to the blight, the last elf to insist on maintaining the bond, even as his dragon Kaiseth descended into madness. Both had disappeared into the eastern wilds, presumed dead. Her family had fallen from favor, relegated to managing the archives rather than shaping policy. Once alone, Larael opened the Crimson Book, a collection of songs and poems from the height of the Dragon Peace. She was searching for something specific, a verse that had haunted her dreams for weeks, ever since she'd glimpsed it in a fragmentary text she removed from the archives. Her fingers moved across pages of elegant elven script, stopping at a section titled "The Prophecy of Renewal." Her heart quickened. This was it, the complete version. She read, "When the stars fall from the sky to forge, when grief becomes the hammer's strength, when mortal hands shape what magic cannot touch, the circle breaks. When the fire forgets and the iron remembers, the blight shall break. From ashes of betrayal, truth will rise. First fire quenched, first bond restored." Larael's hands trembled slightly. The conclave had dismissed this as mere poetry, a metaphorical lament for paradise lost. But Larael had studied the linguistic structures of ancient elven verse. This wasn't written as allegory. It used the imperative form reserved for literal prophecy. And the reference to mortal hands? That could only mean humans. Humans who the elves had abandoned to Dragonfire while retreating behind their warded forests. She copied the verse onto a small parchment, tucked it into her sleeve, and replaced the book. Months of research had led her to suspect something almost unthinkable, that the Dragonfire blight was not a natural corruption, but a curse that might have originated with her own people. And if this prophecy was to be believed, the cure would not come from elven magic, but from human hands. She needed to find these mortal hands before the Conclave realized what she'd discovered, before they silenced her as they had silenced others who questioned the official narrative of the blight. As she slipped from the Hall of Records, Larael felt a weight settle onto her shoulders, the weight of a truth too dangerous to ignore, yet too explosive to share. If she was right, everything the elves had done since the first dragon turned was not just ineffective, it was wrong. When dawn broke over Kestal, Tamlin was already at his forge, but this time he had moved his operation to an abandoned mineshaft high in the mountains, away from prying eyes and concerned whispers. The black ore from the high mines lay before him, 100 pounds of it, gathered over years of experiments never completed. In the flickering light of his forge, the metal seemed to drink in the flame rather than reflect it, as if hungry for heat. Corwin's words echoed in his mind. Each hammer blow, a moment remembered. Each fold, a love honored. Traditional forge work relied on precision, temperatures, timing. But what Corwin described was something else entirely. A ritual of memory and intent. Metallurgy fused with something older, not quite magic, something humans once knew before they convinced themselves they needed elven enhancements to accomplish the extraordinary. Tamlin hesitated, feeling foolish. This was madness, and yet... He closed his eyes and thought of Miriam, her laugh like water over stones, the way she hummed while kneading bread, how her hands always smelled of lavender no matter what work she'd been doing. He thought of Livy, only 5 when the dragons came, her gap-toothed smile, her serious questions about the stars, the wooden horse he'd carved for her that she carried everywhere. He thought of them burning. With each strike, he named a memory. With each fold of the metal, he recounted a story, sometimes laughing through tears, sometimes shouting in rage, sometimes whispering so softly that the words were lost in the roar of the forge. Days passed. He slept only when exhaustion claimed him. He ate only when his body demanded it. The metal began to take shape. Not plate armor as originally planned, but something more intricate. Scales, overlapping like dragon hide itself. With each piece, he incorporated fragments of Miriam's jewelry, Livy's toys, items salvaged from their home before it collapsed into ash. Halwyn brought him food sometimes, never asking what progress he made. Others from the village came too, drawn by curiosity or concern. They watched from the mineshaft entrance as Tamlin spoke to ghosts and grief while shaping something impossible. On the 7th day, Kova the huntress brought him news he barely registered. Another dragon had been spotted, circling the western ridges. The village was preparing for a possible attack. "You should come down," she urged. "The shelters—" "This is my shelter," Tamlin replied, not looking up from his work. The armor was taking its final form, a suit of overlapping black scales that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This is my shield." Kova looked at him with pity. "Tamlin, no armor can withstand Dragonfire. We've all seen—" "Then you'll see something new," he said with quiet certainty. She left him to his madness. By nightfall, it was complete. Tamlin stood before his creation, a full suit of articulated armor, black as midnight, lighter than it had any right to be. Incorporated into the breastplate was a stylized tree, fashioned from the remains of Miriam's silver necklace. The gauntlets bore Livy's name, spelled out in tiny bronze letters that had once adorned her toy chest. The helmet was the masterpiece, shaped not to mimic a dragon, as elven ceremonial armor often did, but to stand in defiance of one. The visor, when lowered, revealed only the wearer's eyes, which would look out through shields of polished obsidian, the only material known to remain clear after exposure to Dragonfire, if only briefly. Tamlin reached out to touch it, and for a moment thought he felt warmth emanate from the metal. Not the residual heat of the forge, but something else, something alive. A distant roar shattered the silence, followed by the village alarm bell. The dragon had come. The western sky burned orange. Dragon breath had set the autumn forest ablaze, creating a wall of fire advancing toward Kestal's outer farms. Villagers ran for the stone shelters dug into the mountainside. From the high mineshaft, Tamlin could see the beast circling. Its scales glinted copper in the firelight. Wings spread wide enough to cast shadows over entire houses. Intelligence gleamed in its eyes. That was the cruelest part of the blight. It didn't rob dragons of their minds, only their compassion. The dragon dove toward the grain silo with lethal intent. Tamlin moved without conscious thought. The armor assembled around him piece by piece, surprisingly light, conforming to his body. The helmet came last, settling over his head with a soft click. Through the obsidian eye shields, the world looked sharper, clearer. The distant flames jumped into focus. The dragon's movements seemed to slow, and deep in his chest, Tamlin felt something he hadn't experienced since the day his family burned. Resolve. By the time he reached the burning edge of the village, the dragon had set the silo ablaze and moved on to the meeting hall, where those who couldn't reach the mountain shelters had gathered. "Here!" Tamlin shouted, his voice strangely amplified by the helmet. "Face me!" The dragon swiveled its head, assessing this new threat, and changed course. Tamlin stood his ground in the village square. Behind him, villagers shouted warnings. The dragon landed with earth-shaking force. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Scales like burnished metal, teeth like polished daggers, eyes like amber caught in sunlight. "You are not like the others who hide," it spoke, its voice a rasp of metal on stone. "You wear the skin of my kind, little morsel, an homage before you burn." The dragon exhaled. Fire engulfed Tamlin completely, hotter than any forge, bright as the sun itself. Inside that inferno, Tamlin waited for pain that never came. The armor grew warm, but not unbearably so. The black scales seemed to drink in the flame, growing not weaker but stronger. He took one step forward, then another, walking through fire. The dragon's attack faltered. It reared back in shock, roaring. Tamlin emerged from the dissipating flames, armor intact. Not a single scale melted or warped. The only visible change was a faint glow that seemed to pulse from the seams between plates, a heartbeat of captured fire. The dragon's next attack came as physical assault. A lashing tail aimed to shatter Tamlin's body. Tamlin dodged with surprising speed, the armor moving with him as if it anticipated the attack. What followed was a dance of death in the village square. Dragon and man, predator and prey, with roles increasingly unclear. When claws struck the armor, they failed to penetrate. When teeth snapped, they found no purchase. With each frustrated attack, the dragon's discipline faltered. Tamlin had drawn his forge hammer, its head glowing with captured dragonfire, and each blow against the dragon's scales left smoldering impact craters. Then came the moment that would be recorded in a dozen different accounts. The dragon broke first. With a roar of frustration, it took to the air, circled once, and fled toward the distant mountains. In the square, Tamlin stood motionless, hammer still raised. Then his knees buckled, and he collapsed. Not from injury, but from sheer exhaustion and emotional release. By morning, the story had begun to transform. In taverns and market squares across 3 provinces, travelers shared whispered accounts. A human blacksmith had stood in Dragonfire and walked out unburned. Everyone agreed on one thing. Something had changed in the long losing war against the dragons. For the first time in memory, a dragon had retreated from human defiance. News traveled slowly between the human kingdoms and elven lands. Larael received the news in a news scroll. Hammer fights fire and wins. Prophecy stirs. A human smith had created something that withstood Dragonfire, the iron that remembered. That night, she gathered essentials for travel, copied key passages from restricted texts, and slipped away from Siltharion. Larael's destination? Kestal, a human village so insignificant it barely appeared on elven maps. And her purpose? To find the blacksmith who had accomplished the impossible. Tamlin found himself elevated from village eccentric to celebrated hero overnight. The armor was displayed in the meeting hall, surrounded by offerings like some kind of shrine. He hated it. Victory felt hollow. The dragon had fled, but the blight remained. One suit of armor couldn't protect everyone, and he had no idea if he could recreate his process. Tamlin was in this state of frustrated contemplation when a shadow darkened his forge door. "I've said no to every apprentice request in the village," he called out without looking up. "I can't teach what I don't understand." "Fortunate, then, that I haven't come to apprentice," replied a voice with the distinct accent of the elven concordat. The figure in his doorway was unmistakably elven, tall and slender, with angular features and pointed ears. Her hair was deep auburn, pulled back in an intricate braid. Most striking were her eyes, amber with flecks of gold, regarding him with intense curiosity. "The Concordat missed their chance to help. We don't need your observations now. I am not here as a representative of the Concordat. she replied, stepping inside. "My name is Larael Amanil. I've traveled a considerable distance to meet the man who forged armor that remembers fire." Remembers? Tamlin's eyes narrowed. Only he had described it that way. "When the fire forgets and the iron remembers, the blight shall break," Larael quoted, an ancient prophecy buried in our archives, one the Concordat has chosen to ignore. Tamlin set down his tools. "You're a long way from your warded forests, Larael Amanil. As are you from your place as a simple village smith." Her gaze moved to the armor. "May I?" He nodded curtly. Larael approached the armor with reverence. "Extraordinary. No enchantments, no wards, no runic engravings. Yet it clearly holds something. I believe this armor is key to ending the blight." Tamlin laughed bitterly. "One suit of armor against hundreds of corrupted dragons?" "You misunderstand," she said. "Not as a weapon, as a cure." No one spoke of curing the blight. It was considered an irreversible corruption. Larael reached into her cloak and withdrew a small scroll. "The prophecy speaks of breaking the blight, not just defending against it. I've spent years researching the origins of the corruption. It isn't natural, it's a curse." "A curse? Cast by whom?" "By my people, or more specifically, by the 13 who rule." "Why?" Tamlin demanded. "The dragons were your allies." Larael looked somber. "The truth is more complex. The Elven 13 sought to bind the dragons completely to their will, to make them eternal servants rather than partners. One dragon resisted, Ashurion, eldest of their kind. The 13 cursed him with the blight as punishment. They never anticipated it would spread to other dragons. And when it did spread, your leaders sealed your borders and left us to burn." Tamlin's voice was dangerous. "While claiming it was a natural corruption beyond anyone's control." "Yes." Larael's simple admission surprised him. "I came because the armor you've created may be the key to reaching Ashurion, to breaking the original curse. It's the only substance that can withstand his fire long enough to enter his mind." "Enter a dragon's mind? Ha! That's not possible." "With soul-binding magic, it is. Before the blight, elves and dragons shared consciousnesses, regularly through the bond. The armor would protect you from the physical fire, while attempting to reach what remains of Ashurion's corrupted self." Larael fidgeted with her intricate braid as she spoke. "So you want me to don my armor, travel to wherever this ancient dragon hides, and let you perform elven magic on me?" Larael shrugged. "Yes." Tamlin rolled his eyes. "Entitled elves. Why should I trust a word you say?" "Because I lost my brother to the blight. Because I've risked everything coming here. And because if I'm wrong, you lose nothing except time spent in my irritating company. But if I'm right..." "If you're right, we might save what's left of the world," Tamlin finished grudgingly. A commotion outside interrupted their standoff. Shouts of alarm, the clash of makeshift weapons. "Dragon!" came the cry from the village below. "Northeast approach!" Tamlin moved instantly to the armor, fingers working buckles and clasps with practiced speed. "This is not a coincidence," Larael said urgently. "Dragons have become more aggressive near those who defy them. The one you drove off likely summoned others." "Fascinating academic observation," Tamlin grunted as he secured the breastplate. The helmet was the final piece. As he lifted it, Larael placed a hand on his arm, the first physical contact between them. "Let me help," she said. "I may not have my Concordat's resources, but I'm not defenseless." Tamlin paused, searching her face for deception and finding none. "Fine, but stay behind me when we reach the village." "Nor yours, human," she replied with unexpected wryness. "I've traveled too far to scrape you off dragon teeth." Despite everything, Tamlin found himself fighting a smile as he lowered the helmet into place. The scene in the village square was chaos. This dragon was larger than the one Tamlin had faced before. Its scales were a deep emerald, almost black in the fading light. It seemed to be toying with the defenders. When Tamlin emerged, armor gleaming dully in the torchlight, the dragon's attention immediately shifted. "The Defiant One," it called down, voice like grinding stones. "The one who walked through fire." Tamlin advanced to the village center, aware of Larael moving to his right flank. "And brought an elf," the dragon continued. "Have the forest dwellers finally emerged to die alongside their shorter-lived pawns?" Larael stepped forward. "We aren't all hiding, dragonkin. Some of us remember the old ways." The dragon descended, landing on the village fountain. "Old ways." "Ha ha 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 ha!" The dragon laughed, a terrible sound. "The elf speaks of old ways while her kind cower behind wards and deceptions." Its head swiveled toward Tamlin. "And you, human, your shell protected you once. Will it withstand true fury? Will it withstand me?" It unleashed a torrent of flame, far more intense than what Tamlin had faced before. Inside the inferno, he felt the armor respond differently this time. Instead of merely resisting the heat, it seemed to resonate. A humming sensation traveled through the metal. Images flashed in Tamlin's mind. Forests of massive trees, skies filled with wheeling dragons, elven cities of crystal and living wood. Memories, but not his own. The dragon's thoughts were bleeding through the fire into the armor, and from the armor into Tamlin's consciousness. When the flame ceased, Tamlin remained standing, armor glowing with absorbed energy. But he was disoriented, mind reeling from contact with an alien consciousness. The dragon appeared equally disturbed. It shook its massive head, eyes widening in alarm. "What did you do?" it hissed. "What manner of trick is this?" Larael moved to Tamlin's side. "The armor," she whispered. "It's creating a link, just as the prophecy suggested." To the dragon she called, "No trick, Great One, only the beginning of remembrance." The dragon backed away. "Memory is pain," it snarled. "The blight protects us from memory." It launched itself skyward, fleeing not in humiliation, but in what appeared to be genuine fear. Tamlin removed his helmet, gasping for air. What just happened?" Larael's eyes shone with excitement. "The armor didn't just resist the fire. It created a momentary soul bond, just like the ancient riders shared with their dragons. You touched its mind, and it touched yours." "I saw things, places, not memories as I understand them, but—" "Dragon memory is different, more immersive, more primal. What did you see?" "Forests, mountains I've never seen, and pain. So much pain, like being torn in two." "The moment of corruption," Larael murmured. "The moment the blight took hold." The villagers were approaching cautiously, expressions mixed between awe and suspicion, the latter directed primarily at Larael. "She helped," Tamlin announced firmly. "The elf stood with us." As they walked toward the hall, Larael leaned close to Tamlin. "If the armor can create even a momentary bond with a normal corrupted dragon—" "Then it might work with your Ashurion," Tamlin finished, "if we can find him." "I know where he is. The Shattered Spire, in the far north. A place where reality itself has been damaged by the initial curse." Tamlin nodded slowly. "I'll need supplies, preparations, and it seems I need an elven guide who knows more about dragon minds than she initially admitted." Larael looked slightly embarrassed. "I wasn't certain the armor would function as the texts described. It seemed presumptuous to explain the full theory without evidence." "Presumptuous?" Tamlin repeated with a dry chuckle. "Ha! A diplomatic way of saying you thought I'd throw you out of my forge for spouting mystical nonsense." "Would you have?" "Probably," he admitted. "But not anymore." For the first time since entering his forge, Larael smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious features. "Progress, then. For an elf and a human, that's no small achievement. If this works, if we break the curse, what happens to the dragons?" Larael's smile faded. "I don't know. The texts aren't clear, but they should return to their uncorrupted state, intelligent, powerful, but no longer driven by rage and destruction. Will they remember what they did while corrupted? Would you want to forget what had happened to your family, even if remembering causes pain? Tamlin thought of the armor, forged from memory's fire. No, he said finally. Memory is necessary, even when it burns. They entered the meeting hall together, an unlikely alliance formed in fire and necessity, the first cooperative step between their peoples in a generation. The journey north took 17 days. 17 days of tense campsites, wary conversations, and gradual, reluctant sharing of knowledge. 17 days of watching the landscape transform from familiar terraced fields to something increasingly otherworldly. Lorraine proved a surprisingly practical traveling companion. She could start fires without flint, identify edible plants, and move through dense undergrowth without disturbing a single leaf. He provided skills she lacked: hunting, metalwork, and an uncanny sense for unsafe ground. By the 10th day, they had developed routines and compromises. By the 15th, something resembling trust. "The spire should be visible once we crest this ridge," Lorraine said, consulting a star chart copied from Slytherian's archives. They continued their ascent in companionable silence. Tamlin reached the top first, extending a hand to help Lorraine over the edge, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a fortnight ago. Then he saw it, and words failed him. The shattered spire did not resemble any mountain Tamlin had ever seen. It looked as if someone had taken a perfectly conical peak and divided it vertically into 7 jagged sections, then twisted each segment and suspended them in midair, separated by gaps of empty space. The stone itself shifted colors as he watched, obsidian black to blood red to silvery white. At the apex perched a structure that defied architectural logic, part temple, part fortress, its walls flowing like liquid despite being clearly solid. Most disturbing was the behavior of light around the spire. Sunbeams bent at impossible angles, creating shadows that pointed toward the sun rather than away from it. The air itself appeared to ripple. "What manner of magic did this?" Tamlin whispered. "Not magic," Lorraine said softly. "The texts call it unwinding, a fundamental unraveling of what binds existence together. The backlash of the curse. The curse that created the blight was never meant to affect a dragon as ancient as Ashurion. When the 13 cast it, the energies rebounded. The effects we see are merely echoes of that original catastrophe." Tamlin sighed deeply. "So, we approach an impossible mountain, somehow cross illusory but real gaps to reach an architecturally nonsensical temple, all to find a dragon who may or may not still exist after centuries, in hopes that my armor will allow me to enter its mind and break a curse no one fully understands." Lorraine nodded. "Precisely." To her surprise, Tamlin laughed. "Well, when you put it like that, how could I possibly object?" Lorraine's mouth broke into an answering smile. "I believe the human phrase is, 'nothing ventured, nothing gained'?" They began their descent toward the spire, humor fading as the landscape grew increasingly altered. Vegetation became bizarre, flowers that grew upside down, trees whose branches spiraled in perfect fractals, grass that chimed when the wind blew through it. Animals showed disturbing transformations too. They passed a deer whose antlers glowed from within, birds with too many wings flying in geometric patterns. "The unwinding affects all living things," Lorraine explained, "but not uniformly. Some adaptations appear beneficial, others deadly." "And us? What will it do to us?" "The texts suggest that conscious minds can resist the effects to a point. The more anchored you are to your sense of self, the less permeable your reality becomes." "Anchored to my sense of self? Like memories of who I am?" "Exactly that way, which is why—" "Why the armor might protect me," Tamlin finished, "because it's anchored in my strongest memories." "And why I might be at greater risk," Lorraine added quietly. Elven identity is more collective, less individually defined than human consciousness. By dusk, they had reached the base of the first segment. The nearest gap was perhaps a half-mile farther along than their path. "We should camp," Tamlin suggested. "Attempt the first crossing in daylight." They ate cold rations, sitting closer together than usual, as if proximity to another conscious mind provided some protection against the unwinding. "Tell me about your brother," Tamlin said suddenly. "Why?" "You said you're focusing on essential memories to stay anchored. Tell me about him. Make the memory stronger." She nodded slowly. Thurion was different from most elves, more impulsive, more willing to question tradition. He became a dragon rider when many were already abandoning the practice, afraid of the early signs of the blight. "What was his dragon called?" "Kaiseth, blue-scaled and swift as summer lightning." They were perfectly matched, both headstrong, both driven by curiosity rather than caution. A pause. When the blight began spreading more rapidly, the Concordat ordered all remaining bonds to be severed. Thurion refused. He believed Kaiseth could be saved. "What happened to them?" "They fled east, beyond Concordat lands. The official record says they perished when Kaiseth's corruption reached completion. But there were inconsistencies in the reports, rumors that they made it as far as the Ghost Marsh." "It's a good anchor," Tamlin said after a moment. "The not knowing, the questions that drive you." "And you? What anchors you besides grief?" "Not much," he admitted. "But I'm learning there are other foundations. Justice, truth, the possibility that what we're doing might prevent others from experiencing what I did." Morning brought new challenges. The first gap loomed before them, a vertical chasm that seemed to extend infinitely downward. She squared her shoulders. "I'll go first." Before Tamlin could protest, Larael approached the gap. For a tense moment, she stood at the brink of seemingly empty space. Then she took a step forward and didn't fall. From Tamlin's perspective, it appeared as if she walked on invisible ground, though her movements were strangely fluid. "It's difficult to describe," she called. "The gap exists, but also doesn't. You have to believe in the path more than you believe in the emptiness." Tamlin approached the edge. Up close, the gap was even more disorienting. The far side seemed simultaneously 1,000 leagues distant and close enough to touch. "Focus on what's real," he told himself. Miriam, Livy, the forge, the armor. He stepped forward. For one vertiginous moment, Tamlin experienced multiple realities simultaneously. Falling, flying, walking, all at once. His mind rebelled. Then his armored foot struck solid stone, and perspective snapped back into something resembling normalcy. He staggered, disoriented but intact, and found Larael studying him. The first crossing is the most difficult. Your mind learns to interpret the unwinding more effectively with practice. The second segment featured gravity that pulled sideways rather than downward. The third contained ruins of a structure that appeared to be simultaneously intact and destroyed. The fourth was shrouded in mist that whispered in voices almost recognizable. By the fifth crossing, Tamlin had learned to partition his consciousness, one part maintaining rational awareness, while another surrendered to the impossible physics of the spire. Larael seemed to be struggling more, her movements becoming jerky, her speech occasionally fragmenting. "Stay with me," he urged during a particularly difficult passage. "Focus on your brother, on why we're here." "Brother," Larael repeated, her voice distant. "Thurion. Kaiseth. The bond that was not broken." Her eyes cleared somewhat. "The temple. We're close." The final segment brought them to the base of the twisted structure at the spire's apex. The walls appeared solid when viewed directly, but liquid when glimpsed from the corner of one's eye. Arches and columns twisted into non-Euclidean geometries. The entrance was a vertical slit that pulsed with sickly light, expanding and contracting like a wound trying to heal. "This is where I put on the armor," Tamlin said, unslinging his pack. She helped him assemble the armor. Piece by piece, the black scales encased him, and with each addition, Tamlin felt his grasp on reality strengthen. The armor remembered, not just fire, but the shape of existence as it should be. "Ready?" he asked, his voice resonating inside the helm. Larael placed a hand on the breastplate, over the stylized tree made from Miriam silver. "Remember, when we find a Shurian, I'll need to establish soul bond quickly. The ritual requires physical contact with both you and, if possible, the dragon." "And if not possible?" Her smile was grim. "We improvise." They entered the pulsing doorway together, passing into an interior space that defied description. The chamber expanded in ways that should have been impossible given the external dimensions. Pathways branched and reconnected in non-linear arrangements. Light sources existed without visible origin. And everywhere, evidence of ancient conflict. Scorch marks from Dragonfire, weapons of forgotten design embedded in surfaces that might be walls or floors or ceilings. After what might have been hours or minutes, time flowed strangely here, they reached the central chamber. "Ashurian?" Larael breathed. The dragon was titanic, far larger than any Tamlin had seen. But the form was wrong, distorted. Parts of Ashurian appeared skeletal, bones exposed as if flesh had been selectively erased. Other sections remained intact, scales of deepest indigo that absorbed light. The head was massive, noble even in partial decay, with horns that spiraled into fractals. Most disturbing were the eyes, open but unseeing. Pupils expanded to consume the entire socket, creating twin voids. The great dragon was suspended in a matrix of translucent crystal, not encased but interpenetrated by it, as if dragon and prison had partially merged. "Is it alive?" Tamlin whispered. "Yes," Larael replied with certainty, "and aware, I think. Trapped in a state between life and death, between corruption and purity." As they drew nearer, the crystal matrix began to emit a low hum that resonated painfully in Tamlin's bones, even through the armor. "The ritual," Larael said urgently. "We need to begin before the temple's defenses activate fully." She withdrew a small pouch from her robes, sprinkling its contents. A powder that glittered with inner light, in a circle around them. Next came a thin silver blade, with which she made a small cut on her palm. "I need your hand," she said to Tamlin. He removed his gauntlet. Larael's blade stung as it drew a thin line of blood. "This next part will be intense," she warned, pressing their bleeding palms together. "Whatever happens, whatever you see, stay anchored to yourself. Remember who you are." Larael began to chant in an ancient dialect of Elvish. The powder ignited, creating a circle of cold blue flame around them. The temple's hum increased in pitch and intensity. Then Larael reached out with her free hand and touched the nearest crystal shard penetrating Ashurian's form. Reality fractured. Tamlin felt his consciousness tear free from his body, pulled by forces beyond comprehension. He was falling through memories not his own, seeing through eyes that had perceived spectrum beyond any human range, feeling wings catch air currents that no longer existed. "Who comes?" The voice nearly shattered his fragmented self, vast as thunder and ancient as stone. Tamlin struggled to respond, to maintain any sense of identity against the overwhelming presence of Ashurian's mind. "I am Tamlin," he managed. "I come with Larael Amanil to break the blight." "Break the blight? Impossible. The curse is bound to my essence. To break it would unmake me." "Then we unmake the curse without unmaking you," came Larael's voice. "The prophecy speaks of remembrance healing the forgetting." "Prophecy. Elven riddles to disguise elven crimes. The blight was never a natural corruption. It was punishment for defiance." Lorrael's mental presence radiated shame and horror. The blight spread through the bond, Tamlin realized. From you to other dragons. Yes, an unintended consequence. The 13 sought to isolate defiance. Instead, they created contagion. Why did you come here? Lorrael asked. To this place? I sought to contain the spread, to isolate myself where the damage might end with me, but it was too late. The curse feeds on forgetting, Tamlin said slowly, on denial of truth, on refusing to acknowledge pain. And my armor, forged through remembrance, through acknowledgement of pain, stands in opposition to the blight's fundamental nature. Lorrael's presence moved closer. We can break the curse, first hatched, but you must guide us. For the first time, uncertainty colored the ancient dragon's thoughts. After centuries of corruption, the curse has become part of me. There must be a way, Tamlin insisted. The prophecy speaks of breaking the blight, not destroying you with it. Prophecies are ambiguous by design, but you have come too far to leave empty-handed. There may be a way, though the cost will be high. What way? Tamlin pressed. The armor you wear, if it could absorb the original curse from my essence, contain it, perhaps the corruption would end at its source. Lorrael's presence flared with alarm. Absorb the curse? The armor would become a vessel for the very corruption we seek to end. And its wearer? Tamlin asked. Would likely not survive the process. Silence fell in the mental landscape. To walk away was to accept the continued suffering of dragons and humans. To proceed was to likely sacrifice himself for an uncertain outcome. There must be another way, Lorrael insisted. Tamlin's thoughts turned to villages like Ashkeep, to families like his own, consumed by fire born of ancient elven arrogance. How would it work? He asked, his decision already forming. Terran, no! Lorrael protested. The curse exists as a fire within me. Your armor, forged from memory and truth, could serve as a counterfire, a flame that consumes the curse rather than feeding it. If the armor absorbed the curse, what would happen to the dragons already corrupted? Uncertain, but the source would be contained. No new dragons would fall, and those already corrupted might, in time, find their way back to their true selves. Lorrael's presence moved closer to Tamlin's. You cannot do this. The risk is mine to take, he finished firmly. Tamlin addressed the first hatched. I'll do it. Show me the path to the wound. As you wish, though in all my centuries I never expected salvation might come from hands without magic. With a sensation like rushing water, their consciousnesses returned to their physical forms. You cannot do this, Lorrael said immediately. We'll find another way. There is no other way, Tamlin replied, and you know it. He returned to Ashurian's massive form. The wound was obvious. A jagged rent in the dragon's chest, partially obscured by crystal formations. From within, a sickly orange glow pulsed. How do I reach it? He asked aloud. At that moment, a portion of crystal shimmered and became translucent, revealing a pathway that hadn't existed before. Lorrael clearly wanted to argue further, but stopped. Then I'm coming with you, at least to the wound's edge. It's too dangerous. So is what you're planning, she countered, and you may need my help to stabilize the connection once the transfer begins. Together, they stepped through the revealed passage into a crystalline tunnel that wound through Ashurian's suspended form. As they progressed deeper, the temple's hum intensified. The armor vibrated in response, scales shifting minutely. Finally, they reached a chamber directly behind the wound, a space that appeared to exist simultaneously inside and outside Ashurian's body. The crystal here was blood-red and pulsed with malevolent energy. Tamlin turned to Lorrael. Whatever happens next, thank you for believing the prophecy, for finding me." Lorrael's eyes shimmered with tears, a very un-elven display of emotion. "I should have come sooner. My people should have admitted the truth centuries ago." "Then remember that," Tamlin said simply. "Remember all of this, and make sure others remember too." She embraced him, armor and all. "I will remember the smith who defied fire," she whispered. "I promise." Tamlin returned the embrace, then gently disengaged. "The ritual you performed to bond with Ashurian, can you use it again to help stabilize the transfer?" She nodded. Lorrael began preparations for the ritual, making symbols with the glittering powder. Tamlin approached the wound, studying the pulsing orange glow. Tamlin removed his gauntlets. If he was to confront the curse directly, it would be with his bare hands, the same hands that had shaped the armor with grief and memory. "Now," he said, and plunged his hands into the wound. Pain beyond imagination coursed through Tamlin's body. The armor responded immediately, scales glowing white-hot as they began to absorb the corrupting energy. Tamlin felt the curse flow into him, through him, seeking purchase in his consciousness. It was ancient, intelligent, and hungry, a force designed to make dragons forget their true nature. "Hold fast," Ashurian's voice thundered. Visions assaulted Tamlin's consciousness, not just his own memories of loss, but countless others. Dragons burning elven cities, elves abandoning human settlements, the centuries of pain that had followed the 13's fateful decision. But with each new horror, Tamlin responded, not with denial, but with acknowledgement. The armor grew hotter, drawing the curse into itself like a sponge absorbing poison. Each scale vibrated with contained energy. Tamlin's consciousness began to fragment. As the curse transferred to the armor, Ashurian's crystallized form began to shift. Areas once frozen in partial decay slowly regenerated, scales regaining their midnight blue luster. The temple itself started to stabilize. "It's working!" Lorrael shouted. "The spire is healing as Ashurian heals." The curse had now largely transferred to the armor, which had reached a critical threshold. The black scales glowed with contained fire, hairline fractures appearing. "Release it, Tamlin," came Ashurian's voice, stronger now, "before it consumes you completely." With tremendous effort, Tamlin pulled his hands from the wound, which was no longer a wound at all, but healthy dragon flesh. He staggered backward, armor cracking audibly as the curse raged within its confines. "Take it off!" Lorrael cried, rushing to his side. "Quickly!" Together they worked to remove the armor piece by piece, each segment burning to the touch. As each was removed, it continued to glow with captured corruption. The helmet came last. When Tamlin lifted it away, the change in perspective was jarring. Without the obsidian eye shields, the chamber appeared transformed, brighter, more solid. The reality distortions greatly diminished. Ashurian had changed as well. Where once a half-skeletal, partially crystallized form had hung suspended, now a magnificent dragon lay curled on the chamber floor. His scales shimmered with health, his eyes clear of the clouded rage that characterized corrupted dragons. "Ashurian!" Lorrael whispered in awe. The great dragon raised his head, regarding them with eyes ancient and wise. When he spoke, it was aloud rather than in their minds, his voice resonant but no longer overwhelming. "Human smith, elven scholar, you have accomplished what I believed impossible." He lowered his massive head in a gesture of respect. "The original curse is contained, though not destroyed." All eyes turned to the armor, now arranged in a semicircle on the chamber floor. Each piece continued to pulse with captured corruption. "What do we do with it now?" Tamlin asked, swaying from exhaustion. "It can't be worn again, and we can't risk the curse escaping." "It must be sealed," Ashurian replied, "in a place where the unwinding is strongest, where reality is malleable enough to contain it permanently." "The heart of the spire," Lorrael suggested. "The point where all segments intersect." Ashurian nodded. A fitting prison for the elven folly, but we must act quickly. Indeed, tremors ran through the temple with increasing frequency. What had been a healing transformation was becoming something more volatile as the concentrated curse sought escape from its new vessel. I can't carry it, Tamlin said, looking at his hands. Where they had touched the curse directly, the skin was marked with intricate patterns, beautiful but clearly unnatural. Then I shall bear this burden, Ashurian declared, rising to his full height. It is fitting that I, first victim of the blight, should ensure its containment. The Nexus will hold the curse until the end of days. And the dragons already affected by the blight? Larael asked. With the source contained, the corruption can spread no further. Those already touched, they may find their way back to themselves in time, particularly if there are those willing to remind them of what they once were. Tamlin looked at his marked hands, feeling a profound mixture of loss and accomplishment. The armor, his creation, his memorial to Miriam and Livy, was gone, but its purpose had been fulfilled in ways he could never have imagined. By the time they reached the base, exhaustion had claimed both human and elf. They made camp at the spire's foot, beneath a sky where stars once again followed predictable patterns. What will you do now? Tamlin asked the dragon as night deepened. Ashurian considered the question, his ancient eyes reflecting starlight. First, I must find others of my kind, those not fully lost to the blight. Help them remember their true selves. Beyond that, there is much healing needed in this broken world. And you? Ashurian turned the question back to Tamlin. I don't know, he admitted. Return to Kestal, perhaps? Continue my work as a smith, though ordinary steel seems insufficient now. Nothing wrought with true purpose is ordinary, Ashurian observed. Perhaps your calling is to forge connections rather than weapons, bridges between peoples long separated by fear and blame. The Concordant will not welcome news of the truth, Larael said. They have built centuries of authority on their deception. Yet the truth must be told, Ashurian replied, by one who was there at the beginning, and by those who helped end it. I intend to return to Siltharion, Larael said, resolute, to present evidence of what really happened. The younger elves at least deserve to know why dragons turned and how the corruption was contained. You'll face opposition, Tamlin warned. Tamlin found himself reluctant to part ways with this unlikely companion. I could come with you to Siltharion. A human witness might add weight to your account. Larael looked surprised, then thoughtful. No human has entered the elven capital since the isolation edict. Ashurian rumbled. The separation of peoples has served only to perpetuate misunderstanding and blame. Dawn brought clarity and decision. They would journey together, dragon, elf, and human. First to Kestal to prove to the villagers that dragons could be allies once more, then on to Siltharion to confront the elven concordant with the truth. It would not be an easy path. Centuries of fear and hatred could not be undone in a day, but it was a beginning. Ahead, the future waited to be shaped, not by magic or destiny, but by the choices of those willing to remember, to endure, to forge new paths from the metal of old sorrows.